Hello everyone, this is Dalster and welcome to another episode review of Dark Side of the Ring, episode 7. And today's episode we focus on the career of Abdullah the Butcher. Before we talk more about who he is, viewer discretion is advised. If you're very squeamish or hate looking at violence, this episode might not be for you. I don't know much about Abdullah at all, but from the episode description, he sounds like a very violent guy. Probably one of those violent ECW wrestlers, I bet. Hey guys, so it's been a couple minutes since I watched the episode, and after watching this episode, I'm going to have to warn you guys that there is a lot of blood and violence when talking about this episode. It's really gross, so if you get easily triggered by raw meat or blood of some sort, do not watch this episode. Start from the beginning of the Abdullah the Butcher's childhood until today. Just to give you some help, I'll call Abdullah the Butcher Abdullah, Lawrence, or Larry, just so there is no confusion. Abdullah's real name is Lawrence Robert Shreve, born on January 11th, 1941. Lawrence was born in Ontario, Canada, but says that his wrestling character was born in Sudan, Africa, of some sort. He has a total of 7 siblings, with his 2 parents living in a small 2-bedroom home. 2 were interviewed for this episode, which are Ralph and Josephine. Josephine said that 2 or 3 of Abdullah's siblings slept in a bed together as kids. Ralph, on the other hand, slept in the bathroom tub while the father peed in a can. He had to get out of the bathroom when the females needed to pee, and calls his brother Larry instead of Lawrence. Ralph and a lot of people in this episode mentioned how you have to talk to Lawrence from a long distance because he's terrifying when you get so close. Lawrence's parents work really hard, and when talking about them, he gets emotional and sad. His mother would scrub floors, and when he saw his mom scrubbing the floor, Lawrence wanted to make money instead of going to school so that he could help his mom. First, Lawrence bought candy so that he can sell it at school, but it did not work as some of the kids would not pay. The children would be absent as they were also scared of Lawrence too. Eventually, Lawrence decides to leave the 2nd grade, supposedly, and begins working. Josephine said that Lawrence was a hustler as he shined shoes, worked as a janitor, cut grass, sold old clothes from neighbors, moved items with his truck, and anything else so that he could get paid to do so. Lawrence also trained karate to the seniors at a small area inside of an arena so that they could defend themselves. The manager of the arena recommended Lawrence to do wrestling, and at first Lawrence did not want to until he was told that you get paid a lot of money to wrestle, and he decides to go train eventually. Lawrence crosses the Detroit River and gets trained by the Sheik of Detroit, not the Iron Sheik, in case you guys are confused by it. The other Sheik was an innovator of hardcore wrestling, who was the original man who cut people on the foreheads and threw fireballs at whomever. The parents were against Lawrence wrestling. He told his dad to smack him, and he did, but Lawrence was not bothered by the smack at all. Lawrence then traveled to Puerto Rico and is trained by Carlos Colon, a wrestling promoter, and Hugo Sabinovich, who ends up managing Lawrence almost throughout his career. He then went by Abdullah the Butcher and traveled around the world, such as Japan, Puerto Rico, and North America, where he made a ton of money and was able to retire his mom. Wherever he went, Abdullah would get everyone scared of him. The audience would run whenever Abdullah ran to them. Even the referees weren't safe as Abdullah would attack them. Mick Foley described Abdullah as a nightmare come to life, but even the first seconds of this episode were loud and scary enough for a jump scare once you watch it. Abdullah licked the blood of his opponents and would eat raw meat, such as liver, whenever he wrestled. The financial problems eventually caught up to Abdullah, as he describes it as hell. He said that the people he worked with were taking advantage of him since Abdullah said that he could not read or write. Abdullah then gets a caregiver who did not know at first that he was a wrestler until her son pointed out that when they went to one of Abdullah's restaurants. Her name is Jocelyn, and she helped homeless people, but some people have said that she might be Abdullah's wife. Lawrence was in character most of the time, as Mick Foley explains in a story that a flight attendant got scared of Abdullah when he widened his eyes and had saliva coming out of his mouth, which the flight attendant then ran off. Abdullah was also very popular in Japan, as he was in magazine covers, cartoons, One of the cartoons, or anime as people would like to call it, being One Piece, video games, and had an album that he recorded in a dressing room. Abdullah then becomes a mentor to Devin Nicholson, also known as Hannibal, who eventually retires Abdullah. Devin started his wrestling career at Stampede Wrestling in 2001, and then he creates his own indie promotion called Great North Wrestling. He started working with Abdullah in 2006. They worked together in matches, including tag team matches. At this time in the 2000s, Abdullah had been wrestling for 6 decades. Devin found out about Abdullah from his grandmother because she was a wrestling fan. He saw Abdullah in the movie I Like to Hurt People. In this episode, Devin shows us how he slices his opponents by putting tape on his wrists, then putting the blade on top, and then putting more tape on it. From the clips in this episode, Hannibal was an aggressive heel, especially that one clip where he slapped someone really hard as though it looked really real. Tony Atlas said that Abdullah would stick the blades deep and the men would have to suck it up, since this is what the men in wrestling signed up for. Vince McMahon had trouble signing Abdullah because of his violent wrestling style. However, Abdullah did get inducted in the WWE Hall of Fame in 2011. Even Abdullah could not trust himself when it came to violence and aggression. One time, he and Devin were guests for a show called Rogers Daytime in 2009, and Abdullah put a male host in a headlock followed by breaking a dish on the host's head. The host had a little bit of blood, and Abdullah was in his 60s when this happened in 2009. Hannibal eventually gets signed by WWE and says in this episode that Abdullah was very happy when he got signed in WWE. His time in WWE was short-lived because he tested positive for hepatitis C. Devin believes that he got the virus because of the blade training he had from Abdullah and thinks that Abdullah cost Devin's wrestling career. Abdullah refuses to talk about his situation with Devin, and Devin did a documentary called This Is Hannibal, which was about his wrestling career ending too soon. In this episode, they also show a clip from 2007 where Devin gets cut by Abdullah, and Abdullah allegedly then cuts his own head. Abdullah has done it for 50 years, but even Hugo was surprised by the clip. Also in the clip, it looks as though Abdullah puts the blade where his blood was just in, and then cuts in Hannibal. Television News in Ottawa, Canada did a take on this match. Devin gets a lawyer and requests Abdullah to get a blood test, which he did, and they found out that Abdullah has had a history of hepatitis C. Hannibal files a lawsuit, but Abdullah said that it was difficult to understand the case as he could not read and cried in front of Jocelyn. Abdullah loses his case because he could not read the letters of when the hearings were going to happen. He was found guilty of negligence, assault, and battery. Devin said that Abdullah should have known better. Abdullah then claims that Devin gave him hepatitis C, but the judge sides with Devin and was supposed to get $2.3 million. Tony thinks that Hannibal does not deserve the money because Devin should have known what he was getting himself into, and that Hannibal should have changed the blade, but Devin seemed too scared, so Abdullah cut for him, which supposedly costed Devin. In order to financially support himself, Abdullah made wrestling-related appearances and signings. As of today, Abdullah uses a walker and has scars on his head after all the cuts he's put himself through the years. Abdullah has yet to pay Hannibal, but Hannibal claims that Abdullah moved his assets to avoid paying him. Jocelyn shows us the condition Abdullah and her currently live in, and it looks unsafe for them. Lawrence feels guilty for not going to school and that it could have saved him from the court case and financial problems. Devin does not believe that Abdullah could not read, as he said that he saw Abdullah read letters and restaurant menus. Even McFoley said that he saw Abdullah read the menus. Abdullah's siblings defend him as they said that he cannot read but found ways to do so. In this episode, when Mick and Hugo were told that Abdullah cannot read, they both said that this was the first time they heard of such a thing. Hugo was confused because Abdullah owned a lot of businesses through the years. In 2021, however, Devin cuts a referee as the ref was hired to bleed in the wrestling event. The event did not have medical staff and they thought that the referee did not bleed so easily, but Hannibal kept going. It required a lot of staples for the ref's head to seal up and backtracks Devin's claims of him suing Abdullah. Hugo says that he and the other wrestlers never tested positive for hepatitis C though. In order to have control of hepatitis C, Hannibal does experimental treatment so that he can wrestle again. Hannibal thinks that Abdullah should pay the money he won from the case and take responsibility for his actions if Abdullah wants to make things right. He gets bitter and does not want to talk about Abdullah anymore, but supposedly the judge finds Abdullah liable but not guilty, which is why Devin has not gotten paid yet. Since then, Abdullah got inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by Terry Funk in 2011. Hugo said that he cried when he saw Abdullah getting inducted. Abdullah says that when he dies, he wants people to respect him and not believe in the bad things other people have said about him. Interviewers for this episode are Abdullah the Butcher himself, Mick Foley, Hugo Savinovich, Josephine Heron Shrev, sister of Abdullah, Ralph Shrev, Abdullah's brother, Tony Atlas, Jocelyn Malika Marshall, Abdullah's caregiver, and Devin Hannibal Nicholson. At the end of this episode, it's hard to have a little sympathy for some of the people being interviewed, since Hannibal is also not as innocent as people think he is. I could understand Abdullah's struggles because in my childhood, my parents did not finish school when they were young. It must have been tough for Abdullah to see his mom scrubbing the floors and work all of his life. My mom never attended school since education in Mexico back then wasn't important as it is today. She never learned to read and write in Spanish and English. However, she does know how to write her name and the rest of her kids' names, including mine. I usually have to help her translate and read for her, but I think Abdullah might know how to read certain words. A lot of the restaurant menus do have pictures on them, but it is questioning how he was able to own so many businesses through the years. Maybe he had help, or because he was a big star in wrestling, the people who he worked with gave him a business because he would make money for them. It's really confusing with this problem of Abdullah not being able to read and all. I also kind of blame the people in charge of the wrestling promotions for letting Abdullah get away and do what he wants all these years. They should have toughened up and let Abdullah know about cutting his opponents and using new blades instead. I would think after what happened to Freddie Mercury dying of AIDS and the rise of it during the 80s, these promoters would know that using the same blades or needles would cause infection. It happened to Tommy Lee and his ex-wife Pamela Anderson too. The promoters could at least go over the rules with Abdullah instead of being scared of him and letting him do what he wants. Even if Abdullah were to pay Hannibal, it's too late now, because Abdullah is now in his 80s and could barely work since he uses a walker. As for Devin, I looked into his profile and YouTube channel called Hannibal TV, and he is not as innocent as I thought he was. Hannibal did talk about Abdullah a couple days ago once the Dark Side of the Ring episode aired, even though in the episode he never wanted to talk about Abdullah ever again. I also saw on his profile that he was arrested for assaulting a woman in August of 2022. Which wasn't that long ago, actually. A year ago, actually. Either way, no one is really as innocent as they thought they would be in this episode. Honestly, what was Hannibal thinking when he cut the ref so badly in that wrestling event? I do wish the best for them, even though they had issues in the past. I think that Abdullah's caregiver is his wife, but I'm not sure why he would keep it a secret, though. But what are your guys' thoughts? It's just a very complicated and messy situation. But I mean, wrestling during the 90s and before there were a lot of wrestling promotions that were very violent and just, they would let their wrestlers do what they want. Like, I remember when I watched the New Jack episode, he threw someone and from a really tall height. And there was also, I remember in a commercial back then, WWE used to promote their DVDs. And in one of the commercials they did for ECW, there was a bunch of steel chairs getting thrown in the ring, and I was like, okay, that's kind of weird and violent. I don't know, it's just a very complicated episode. It's kind of hard to side with any of them, but I do think that maybe Abdullah might know some words, but Maybe he didn't read. I don't know. I mean, I know for a fact that my godmother, when she was in junior high, I think she dropped out of school because she got bullied. So I would assume maybe there's just maybe people back in the day just didn't want to go to school and it didn't matter. But nowadays it does matter because you kind of have to get by with the technology and stuff and learning how to read and make calls and everything. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think that Abdullah is a little innocent, or do you agree with Hannah? I personally think neither of them are innocent, but I do think that Abdullah should have been like treated differently. Like maybe people that he worked with, they could have at least been more disciplined with him, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Anyway, comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.